So quickly, before we get to the real meat of this video, which is putting the cab on the frame, I have a bunch of stuff I'm painting right now, waiting for a second coat. A bunch of stuff laying there on the floor that got done yesterday. Some of the pieces I've already kind of bolted back onto the frame. And I've got this guy. I want to talk about this thing quick here. So this is a steering box brace. I took this off of a 90. Just a two-wheeler, just a not a slant six, a V6, 5-speed, cheap truck. And I thought this was odd because I thought, well, why would a two-wheel drive need a thing like that? I thought, well, I'd be like a four-wheel drive, you know, would want those. But since then, and this was 6-7 years ago I took this thing off. Anyway, I have found like 3 other two-wheel drives mostly from the 70s, late 70s, that had really bad cracks in the frame around like where these holes would be on the frame. Just two-wheel drive, and it just seemed odd. So maybe there was a problem with that. Those are all power steering trucks. I don't know if that factors in or not, but anyway, I painted this up, ready to go. To put this in, there's a hole in the frame that needs to get drilled right there for that hole, and then this one is that cross member that comes across the front. Got to figure out where that is and drill that hole too, and which will be simple, just 2 holes to drill. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to put this in. I haven't made up my mind yet whether it's power steering or manual steering I'm going to go with. Still kind of debating that a little bit. I don't do a lot of parallel parking. What do I need power steering for? You know. But we'll see. Doing a little research on how much horsepower loss there is in that. So I'll mention these quick here too. Well, they don't really show up as... There we go. Get close enough. So these are the clips that go on the frame that hold like the brake line on. The fuel line is clipped on in a different way. Sometimes these clips are used for fuel lines also. But so they're simple to take off. You just kind of tap on the backside and they pop right out of the frame. There's a couple of them that you have a hard time getting to. You can get a screwdriver underneath there and just pry them up. And yeah, they're supposed to be red. They're red from the factory. Every now and then you'll find one that's still in pretty decent shape, still has its paint on. So I just blasted them in a little metal etch primer and then some paint. And this is what I use. And you can see that the color of the cap does not represent the color that's in there, which is fine, because this is really, really close to the color these things are. So I don't know if I got a bad can, if they put the wrong cap on. Whatever. That's the only thing that can gets used for. So it's awesome. Oh yeah, back to these clips quick. Obviously I've got these painted, these 3 put in. I've got some more put in down there. I've got one more to put in. Where was it? It's over here somewhere, right there. I gotta put that one in yet. So, but before I do, I'll show you this, if I can get out of the sun enough. You'll see there's kind of 2 different sizes. That centerpiece is a little wonky in there right now, but anyway. Small and big. The small works, you know, for normal brake lines, the 3/16 brake lines. The bigger for all bigger brake lines, or you could, I think I've seen a couple times where these were used for fuel lines. So then you've got your fuel and your return line. But normally they use different clips. At least Mopar does anyway. So one thing to note here. Try to find a good place where I can see this. There we go. They kind of mushroom out on the bottom side. So when you pry them out, you have to undo the mushroom part. So this one you can kind of see is kind of mushed out a little bit. This one is a little bit loose. It's tough to get in there and tap it in right. So, but anyway, yeah, you put them in. At least I put them in. Sometimes you got to tap the middle all the way in so it's bottomed out nice, and then grab a punch and use that tip and either get in there and wedge it sideways, or find a punch, you know, like that, and just pound it in, and then that pounding in, and then of course we'll push the mushroom part of it back out. But either way, and I think even if they're a little bit loose, you know, probably doesn't matter too much, because once they get clipped in, everything kind of holds in place. And but the one thing I guess to be mindful when you put them in, you can spin them after they're in, but if you know which side you're using, so you make sure all the, oops, there we go, all the small ones are in the same direction, or all the big ones, whichever one you're using, so you understand how the brake line kind of fits, you know, how it all clips in. Just make sure you're aware of that, and then you're then you're golden. One final thing with these clips, you know, I marked all of them except one. I missed one when I took everything apart. So sometimes you gotta grab the old line and kind of start scoping around a little bit, seeing if you can find marks on here. And sometimes it's really hard, sometimes it's pretty obvious. There was one on here that seemed pretty obvious. I think that was the one up here. I think that's it right there, you know, and I don't know how well it's going to show up in the camera. So the one thing that I need to do next time, remember what I'm doing before I take everything apart for one, but I'm going to take a little bit of spray paint and I'm going to spray wherever these clips are before I take anything apart. That way there's a little dab of paint on the actual line itself, no questions at all. And of course, if you think you know where one is, and if there's no hole in the frame where you think it is, well then obviously guess again. So there it is. Today we're putting the cab on the frame. I'll show you what I got set up here in a second, but it should go well. I've kind of planned this out, and we're going to find out together. I see one thing I need to make an adjustment on, but I'll do that in a little bit. So, obviously, we have our frame here, and it's on wheels. The whole thing slides around. We have our cab sitting on jack stands. Now, I do see I need to move these in a little bit because it's going to be really close. But, so theoretically, I should be able to slide the whole frame right underneath the cab. Then I'll lift the frame up to the cab, probably that way because it's a little more controlled. Bolt the cab down, or at least set it down on there, making sure everything's lining up in the holes, the cab mounts. And then kind of bring the whole thing back down on these casters, move it up to here where I can, where it's a little less out of the way, kind of get it positioned. Then lift it back up again, put it on jack stands so I can start putting suspension and whatnot underneath of it. So, but yeah, the tape measure says it's all gonna work. Let's find out if this guy's lying to me. Okay, now I've got everything lined up this way. The frame is on jacks, balanced. There's more weight on this side because I've got all the stuff already on. I had to kind of figure that out, a little trial and error. So now we're ready to start lifting. Well, that went as good or better than I expected. Almost learned a valuable lesson about 3 points of contact as I was trying to lower it. I had it just on jacks on both ends, and the whole thing started doing one of these numbers. A little bit of an uneasy feeling, hoping your whole fucking thing doesn't tip over and roll onto its side. So, but if there's two solid points on one end, the opposite end can be a little bobbly because it's always got a stable footing on one end or the other. So if you're gonna do something like this at home, something to remember. Otherwise, yeah, now it's just a matter of we'll see how easy it pulls back into position. It should go super easy if I don't run into a jack or something back there, whatever I ran into. Anyway, cool. So I kind of put it where I want it for now anyway, until I get the suspension on, then I can move it again around. So it seems like it's sitting really high, and it is. It's way higher than what it would be, especially once you get everything put together and set on its suspension. However, the front, that lower control arm has got to swing way down in order to get the spring in there. And if you don't have enough ground clearance, obviously you can't do that. Experience talking. So, and then the other thing I should mention before I get too far, so the cab is on. Just kind of sitting there right now. All the brand new bushings, body mount bushings, if they kind of show up in the camera. They're all in there. Not on the bottom side, so they're not going to fall out. Nothing's going to fall out. The one thing to note is the driver's front corner on all these Dodge pickups, there's basically no adjustment to that. The hole's a little bit bigger than the bolt going through, but not a whole lot. All the rest of them are slotted, so you can move them around. So that's kind of the fixed point when it comes to making sure the cab is square on the frame. And if the cab isn't square on the frame, then like nothing else really seems to want to line up. So before I bolt everything down tight, I will get the tape measure out and I'll measure, you know, I'll X measure across the front here from a few places. I'll do the same thing in the back, compare apples to apples, and if they're off, well, I'll split the difference and I'll kind of go from there. But it should be a relatively simple process, and then the rest of the body then is adjusted off of the cab. And then too, once I get the cab fully bolted down, then I'm gonna go back and see if I can get that driver's door adjusted right. That's the only thing I can think of why it was okay before I took it apart, then I put it back on, and it just, nothing wants to line up quite like it should. And I know I see the passenger door needs a little tweaking, but that's fine. A little tweak is no problem. That was a lot more work than it should have been to get the cab bolted down. So I X measured, you know, from the front using, you know, points like here and up there, and I would X measure one spot, then I move to another one, and the one would say it needs to shift the cab clockwise, the other one says counterclockwise. I went, basically did the same thing on the back. There's not as many points to measure off of, and I couldn't get a straight answer. So then I grabbed the tram gauge, pulled that out. Same thing. I did figure out that, because I was using this bolt hole, that is not centered in there, but still, that wasn't enough of a difference to account for what I was seeing. And I went back and forth, and I know when I tightened it out, then everything kind of shifted. So what I ended up doing back here, the only spot that's consistent here, is the distance with these holes basically to the back of the cab where they're at. That's what I lined up both sides with. You know, the left and right is about the same from what I can measure, you know, from like the rocker panel to the frame or whatever point. So all my great ideas and the way it's supposed to work didn't, because apparently there's just enough variation in the way this cab was welded together up here, you know, with these holes and this and that and everything else, and maybe where these bolt holes are is a little different, or maybe it's, you know, I measured off of those two looking for a different point that was consistent. You know what, it's on there, it's square to at least the back of the frame, and the frame has never been messed with, so there's no reason to believe that anything else is crooked. So as they say, it is what it is.